I was halfway through reading an investment report when Dad showed up at my bedroom door, arms crossed, jaw tight. That look, the one that always carried a mixture of disappointment and impatience, was a familiar sight. "Pack your things, Daniel. Ethan needs this space," he said, voice firm, as if he was announcing a weather update instead of uprooting my life. For a moment, I just stared at my laptop screen, the email from my bank glowing back at me. Foreclosure auction purchase confirmed. If they only knew. "Emma's starting his business," Dad continued, mistaking my silence for defiance. "He needs a proper office. You have until Friday." I leaned back in my chair, tapping my fingers against the desk. The house I had lived in since childhood, the one they were so eager to throw me out of, was now legally mine. Still, I didn't react, not yet. I just gave a slow nod. "Got it. I'll start packing tomorrow." Dad seemed relieved I didn't argue. That was always my role. After all, the reliable son, the stable one, the one who didn't complain while Ethan burned through money like it was his birthright. Ethan, naturally, couldn't wait to rub it in. He strutted into my room not 10 minutes later, dressed in one of those overpriced designer hoodies he loved, the ones Dad paid for. "I'm thinking of painting these walls a deep navy," he mused, running a hand over the beige wallpaper. "It'll really make the place pop for product photos." His business of the week, some high-end streetwear brand, was his latest attempt at entrepreneurship. Just like his record label, just like his organic skincare line, just like the luxury sneaker store. None of them had lasted 6 months. I looked around at my room, the place where I had built my future in silence. The same room where I secretly grew a real estate portfolio, while everyone assumed I was just another desk-bound analyst. "Navy sounds good," I said, keeping my voice neutral. Ethan beamed, completely unaware that I had been tracking our parents' financial collapse for months. He didn't know about the foreclosure notice I found in Dad's study. He didn't know that, while they were busy catering to his failures, I had made one move that changed everything. "You'll be fine, right?" Ethan added, though his tone didn't hold an ounce of concern. "You're good with money and all that stuff. Just find an apartment or something." I almost laughed. Good with money was an understatement. While Ethan was burning through our parents' savings, I had been playing the long game, 12 properties. "This house? Lucky number 13. Don't worry about me," I said smoothly. "I'll figure something out." That night at dinner, Mom tried to soften the blow homemade lasagna, my favorite. I saw right through it. "We know this is sudden," she said, voice gentle, "but Ethan really needs this opportunity." "Like he needed the sneaker shop?" I asked, raising a brow. "Or the record label?" Dad's fork hit the plate with a little too much force. "That's not fair." What wasn't fair was watching them bend over backward for Ethan's every fleeting ambition, while expecting me to be the quiet, compliant son. "You just don't understand," Dad said, shaking his head. "Your brother has vision. He has creativity. He just needs the right support." "And what about my support?" I asked calmly. "The money I gave you for the mortgage last year? The repairs I covered?" Mom shifted uncomfortably. "We appreciate everything, honey, but Ethan has so much potential, and he just needs the proper space," Dad added. To fail again, I wanted to say, but I held my tongue. Not because I was afraid to push back, but because I knew something they didn't. They thought they were kicking me out. In 3 days, they'd realize who was really in control. By Thursday morning, the house was already half taken over. Ethan wasted no time claiming his new office. Boxes of expensive fashion samples cluttered my old space. A sleek black desk, one he probably hadn't paid for, was being assembled by some of his gym buddies, who looked way too excited to help. From the hallway, I watched as Ethan pinned a mood board onto the wall. Magazine cutouts of models, fabric swatches, handwritten ideas for branding. "This is where it all starts," he announced to no one in particular, standing back to admire his work. "Carter Lux is going to change the game." I didn't even need to ask who was funding this latest venture. Mom and Dad hovered nearby, hesitant but hopeful, the way they always were with Ethan's big ideas. They had rewritten reality so many times, convincing themselves that this time would be different. I slipped back into my room, or what was left of it, and sat at my desk, scrolling through my emails. Charlotte had come through. Final ownership documents were in. Lease agreements ready to go. We were locked in for Friday. That night at dinner, the tension was lighter for them, at least. Mom was giddy, talking about how Ethan's brand could take off with the right investors. Dad, for the first time in weeks, looked relaxed, like handing over my room had solved everything. And Ethan? Ethan was thriving in all the attention. This is what I needed, he said between bites of steak. A dedicated space. A fresh start. He turned to me, grinning. Bet it feels good to finally get out of here, huh? I took a sip of my drink, keeping my expression neutral. Yeah, I said. It really does. Ethan smirked, thinking he'd won. By tomorrow night, that smirk would be gone. I woke up Friday morning with a sense of calm determination. By the evening, my parents and Ethan would finally understand the consequences of their choices. Not that they ever considered those before, at least. Not when it came to me. For the past few days, I had played my role well. I had packed just enough personal belongings to make it look like I was preparing to leave, keeping my expressions neutral, my tone even. They had no idea that I was only packing the things that belonged to me, leaving everything else exactly where it was because I wasn't going anywhere. While they were busy celebrating Ethan's new beginning, I was ensuring their reality check would hit them like a freight train. I left early, stopping by my attorney Rachel Walker's office to go over the final paperwork. Are you sure you want to do this in person? Rachel asked, handing me a folder with the finalized deed and lease agreements. I nodded. They need to see it for themselves. Rachel leaned back in her chair, tapping her pen against the desk. I've seen situations like this before. Parents favoring one child, taking advantage of another. But this, she shook her head. This is a whole new level of delusion, I smirked. They're in for a wake-up call. She gave me a knowing look. Just remember, Olivia, business is business. Don't let them guilt you into backing down. I wasn't worried about that. By tonight, they wouldn't have a choice but to take me seriously. At exactly 5:45 p.m., I pulled into my driveway. Mom's SUV was parked in the usual spot. Ethan's ridiculously expensive sports car, the one my parents had co-signed a loan for, was parked diagonally, taking up too much space. Typical. Dad wasn't home yet. Perfect timing. I stepped inside, greeted by the sight of Ethan's gym buddies, carrying out my old bed without even a second thought. Hey, I called out, making them freeze mid-step. Put that back. Ethan, lounging on the couch, looked up from his phone. Relax, Liv. I figured we'd start early. You're moving out in the morning anyway, right? Actually, I said, voice steady, I need everyone to stop what they're doing now. Something in my tone made even Ethan's friends pause. Mom, hearing the commotion, came up the stairs with a confused frown. What's going on? She asked. I think we should wait for Dad, I said, keeping my expression unreadable. Rachel will be here any minute, and we all need to talk. Ethan's smirk faltered slightly. Who the hell is Rachel? Before I could answer, the doorbell rang. Right on cue. I opened it to find Rachel standing there, looking sharp and professional in a dark blazer, a leather briefcase in hand. Good evening, Miss S. Carter. She greeted my mother politely before stepping inside. Is Mr. Carter home yet? Mom's face paled. Why would we need an attorney? Ethan, from behind her, scoffed. Seriously, Olivia? What is this? I didn't respond. Instead, I simply walked to the living room and took a seat. Rachel followed my lead, and then we waited. 10 minutes later, Dad's car pulled into the driveway. As soon as he walked through the door and saw all of us gathered, his brows furrowed. His gaze flicked to Rachel, then to me. What's going on? He demanded. Rachel stood, extending her hand. Mr. Carter, I'm Rachel Walker, Olivia's attorney. I'm here to discuss some important legal matters regarding this property. Dad turned to me, expression darkening. What the hell is this about? I exhaled slowly and set the folder down on the coffee table. 3 weeks ago, I said evenly, I found a foreclosure notice in your office. The one you didn't tell anyone about. The one that explained how you remortgaged this house, our house, so many times to fund Ethan's businesses that you backed yourself into a financial dead end. The room went completely silent. Mom clutched her chest. Ethan's face lost a bit of its color. Dad clenched his jaw. That's none of your damn business, Olivia. I met his glare head on. It became my business the moment you put this house up for auction. Another beat of silence. Then Ethan let out a short laugh, mocking, dismissive. Okay, he said, shaking his head. And what? You suddenly have a spare million lying around to buy it? I smiled. No warmth, no humor. Just cold, undeniable truth. Yes. Mom's hand flew to her mouth. Dad took a half step back. Ethan's smirk disappeared completely. Rachel, ever the professional, slid the ownership deed across the table. As of this morning, she said smoothly, this property is legally owned by Olivia Carter. The weight of those words sank in immediately. Ethan sat down hard, like the air had been knocked out of him. Mom blinked rapidly, as if trying to process what she had just heard. Dad just stared at me, his face going through a cycle of emotions, confusion, disbelief, anger, and, finally, something closer to defeat. That's not possible, he muttered. You're just an analyst. You couldn't afford. I haven't been just an analyst for years, I cut in. I own multiple rental properties across the city. Real estate investment is my actual business. The finance job, that was just my cover while I built my portfolio. Ethan shook his head violently. No, this is some kind of joke. Rachel pulled out another document. I assure you, it's very real. This is the new lease agreement. If you choose to stay, you'll sign it as tenants. Mom started crying. Dad's hands curled into fists at his sides. Ethan looked like he wanted to scream. You can't do this, he whispered. I leaned back in my chair, finally letting my carefully held mask slip just a little. No, I corrected. I already did. I watched, expression unreadable, as the truth settled into their bones. For years they had dismissed me, treated me like an afterthought while they poured everything into Ethan. For years they had assumed I was nothing more than a safe, bet the responsible daughter who would always fall in line. They were wrong. Everything had changed, and for the first time in my life, I was the one holding all the cards. Silence settled over the room like a thick fog. No one moved. No one spoke. Mom's teary eyes darted between me and Rachel, as if expecting one of us to laugh and say it was all a mistake. Dad, usually the one commanding authority, looked like a man who had just lost his footing on solid ground. And Ethan was pale, his hands clenched into tight fists, his entire body vibrating with disbelief. I sat there, calm, composed, and in control. Let's go over the lease terms, Rachel said, her voice smooth and professional as she slid another set of documents across the coffee table. Dad didn't even look at them. You can't seriously expect us to pay rent in our own house. Our house? I repeated, arching a brow. Dad, it hasn't been your house for weeks. It became the bank's the moment you defaulted, and now it's mine. He exhaled sharply, shaking his head like he could physically reject reality. This is our home, Olivia, and you have the option to stay, I said, keeping my voice even. But from now on, that means paying rent. Signing a lease, following the rules. Ethan scoffed, standing abruptly. This is insane. You're not actually going through with this. I tilted my head slightly. What part, exactly? The part where I legally purchased this house? Or the part where I'm offering you fair rental terms despite the fact that you tried to kick me out of my own room? His nostrils flared. You don't even need the money. You're doing this just to be petty. I laughed an actual, genuine laugh, because the irony was just too good. You know what's funny, Ethan? You and Dad were so confident that I was just a dull, predictable analyst, someone who didn't understand business. Someone who would just step aside without a fight. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. But now you get to experience exactly how boring I really am. The next 20 minutes were tense. Mom flipped through the lease papers, sniffling between glances at Dad, who sat there stone-faced. Ethan, arms crossed, muttered under his breath about how unfair this was. This is more than reasonable, Rachel pointed out, tapping a highlighted section. The rent is below market value. Olivia is offering a generous contract with fixed rates for the next 3 years. Mom swallowed hard. 3 years? Yes, I said. I'm not trying to ruin anyone's life here, but I am setting boundaries. If you want to live here, you contribute. No more free rides. No more reckless spending. Ethan let out a short, bitter laugh. So this is about punishing me. I exhaled, rubbing my temples. Ethan, this is about accountability, something you've avoided your entire life. Mom and Dad have sacrificed everything to keep you afloat. And where has that gotten them? Look around. You're standing in a house that was on the verge of being lost forever, and not because of me. Ethan didn't reply. Mom cleared her throat. And if we If we don't sign, Rachel adjusted her glasses. Then you have 30 days to find alternate housing. I watched them absorb that reality. Mom turned to Dad, her voice small. Jonathan, what do we do? Dad didn't answer right away. His gaze finally lifted to meet mine, and for the first time in my life, I saw something resembling respect in his eyes. You really planned all of this, he said quietly. I met his stare. Unwavering, yes. His fingers traced the edges of the lease document. We don't really have a choice, do we? There's always a choice, I said simply. Just like you had a choice when you remortgaged this house for Ethan's businesses, instead of telling him no. Just like you had a choice when you decided to kick me out, rather than hold him accountable. The weight of my words settled over the room, and then Dad picked up a pen and signed. Mom wiped at her eyes, nodded, and followed suit. Ethan sat motionless, his jaw clenched so tight. I thought he might crack a tooth. I'll give you some time to think it over, I told him, standing up. You have until Sunday. If you don't sign by then, you'll need to move out by the end of the month. I turned toward Rachel. We're done here, she nodded, gathering the documents. I'll finalize everything first thing Monday morning. Without another word, I left the room. That night, I stayed in a hotel. Rachel had advised against remaining in the house until everything was legally settled, and I agreed it would give them time to process the new reality. Ethan, apparently, was not taking it well. By the time I checked my phone the next morning, my inbox was flooded with messages from mutual friends. Ethan was blasting me on social media. Screenshots filled my notifications posts, calling me a heartless snake, a sellout, even a traitor to family. The most recent one read, imagine being so bitter and greedy that you evict your own parents and sibling just to feel powerful. What kind of person does that? I sighed, running a hand through my hair. Of course he was trying to play the victim. I texted Rachel. Ethan's stirring up drama online. Should I respond? Her reply came instantly. No. Let him rant. People like him always expose themselves eventually. She was right. Instead of reacting, I got dressed, grabbed a coffee, and checked my rental property reports. I had actual responsibilities, unlike Ethan, who was too busy having a meltdown over facing reality for the first time in his life. By noon, another text came in, this time from Mom. Please come home. We need to talk. I stared at the message for a long moment before responding. I'll be there at 3. Rachel's words echoed in my mind. Business is business. Don't let them guilt you. I wouldn't. They had made their choices. Now, they were finally learning what consequences felt like. When I arrived at the house that afternoon, it felt different. For the first time, it wasn't just my childhood home, it was my property. I stepped inside, noting the tension hanging in the air. Mom stood by the kitchen, nervously wiping her hands on a dish towel. Dad sat at the dining table, looking older than I'd ever seen him, and Ethan was slouched in his usual chair, scrolling on his phone with a scowl, still fuming over his public humiliation. I pulled out a chair across from them, setting my bag down beside me. All right, I said, calm and direct. What did you want to talk about? Mom was the first to speak. Olivia, honey, she hesitated, choosing her words carefully. We just feel like this all happened so suddenly. I exhaled through my nose, leveling her with a steady gaze. It didn't. Dad cleared his throat. What she means is, we feel blindsided. Blindsided? The first repeated, tilting my head slightly. You mean, the same way I felt when you told me to pack my things with no warning? The same way I felt when Ethan was given my room like I didn't even matter? Dad had the decency to look away. Mom sighed, wringing her hands. You should have told us what you were doing, she murmured. I let out a dry laugh. You mean, I should have given you a chance to stop me? She flinched at that, but didn't deny it. Ethan, still glued to his phone, let out a bitter laugh. This is ridiculous. You're acting like some corporate overlord when we're your family. I turned my gaze on him, unimpressed. Funny. You weren't too concerned about family when you were planning to repaint my walls and throw out my things before I'd even moved out. Ethan's mouth snapped shut. Dad sighed, rubbing his temples. Look, Olivia, we've gone over the lease terms. They're fair, more than fair. I leaned back, waiting. I knew there was a but coming, but Dad continued, confirming my suspicion. We can't help but feel like maybe this should have been handled differently. We could have worked together as a family instead of making things so legal. I arched a brow. Oh? You mean like how we worked together, when you decided to hand my space over to Ethan without asking me? He exhaled, defeated. Mom tried again. We just don't want things to feel transactional between us. I folded my arms. That's exactly what this is now. A business transaction. I softened my tone, just slightly. You made that choice when you prioritized Ethan's dreams over reality, when you ignored financial responsibility because you didn't want to tell him no. Ethan scowled. This is so dramatic. You act like I'm some criminal. No, I said coolly. Criminals face consequences. You never have. His jaw clenched. Mom sniffled, wiping her eyes. We got so caught up in trying to support Ethan that we took you for granted. She met my gaze, voice thick with regret. And I'm sorry, Olivia. We both are. I blinked, a little caught off guard. For years, I had accepted the unspoken truth that Ethan was the priority, that my hard work was expected but never celebrated. I never thought I'd actually hear them admit it. It didn't erase everything, but it was a start. Dad sighed, finally signing the lease with a resigned nod. You win. I shook my head. This was never about winning. I slid the document back into my bag and stood. Ethan was still sitting there, arms crossed. He hadn't signed. I turned to him. You have until tomorrow to decide. He scoffed. Oh, thanks so much for the generosity. I didn't take the bait. If you choose not to sign, you have 30 days to move out. He didn't respond. Mom reached for my hand. Will you at least stay for dinner? I studied her face. The way she looked at me not as an obligation, but as someone she had wronged and wanted to make amends with. Slowly, I nodded. Over the next few weeks, things shifted. The initial tension faded into something else, something closer to understanding. Mom and Dad, now paying tenants, started looking at money differently. They even enrolled in a financial management class at the local community college, something I never thought I'd see. Dad told me one night, over dinner, I guess I always saw myself as the one who had to lead. But the truth is, you were always ahead of us. It wasn't a grand apology, but it was enough. Ethan, on the other hand, struggled. His first rent payment was a disaster. He tried to Venmo it to me, and when I rejected it, he blew up. What do you mean I have to write a check? He barked. The lease term state rent is paid through bank transfer or check, I said smoothly. Not payment apps. This isn't brunch with friends, Ethan. It's a business transaction. Dad, surprisingly, backed me up. He went to the bank, got a cashier's check, and handed it to me himself. Just this once, he said. He needs to learn. For the first time in my life, I saw Ethan realize that Dad wasn't going to bail him out forever. 3 weeks in, the real turning point happened. I was in my office when I heard voices downstairs. What do you mean you won't co-sign? Ethan's voice was sharp. Dad's response was firm. I mean, no. We nearly lost everything because of the last few businesses, Ethan. We're lucky Olivia even gave us a second chance, Ethan scoffed. She's just holding this over our heads. Mom, softer but resolute, said, she's charging us below market rent, giving us time to fix our finances. That's more than most people would do. I smiled slightly. They were finally getting it. That night, for the first time ever, Ethan knocked on my office door. He hesitated in the doorway. Can we talk? I gestured for him to sit. What about? He exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. I've been thinking about everything, and maybe. He swallowed hard, like the words pained him. Maybe I've been doing this all wrong. I leaned forward. Go on. How did you do it? His voice was quieter now, almost vulnerable. How did you build all of this? While we were all ignoring you? I considered my answer. I planned. I researched. I didn't rely on handouts. Every penny I made went into something that would grow. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Could you teach me? That surprised me. For years, he thought he was the only one with big dreams. But now he was finally seeing me as someone worth learning from. I set my pen down. I'll help you, I said, but on one condition. He tensed. What? No shortcuts, I said firmly. No mom and dad's money. If you want to build something real, you do it the right way. Ethan nodded slowly. Okay. 6 months later, Ethan signed his own lease this time, for a small office space in one of my rental properties. He paid for it himself, and for the first time, I saw in his eyes what I had always known about myself, that success isn't about getting what you want. It's about earning it, and that's a lesson I was finally able to teach. Story 2, I never thought I'd find myself in this position. It's been a journey of betrayal, heartbreak, and, eventually, triumph. But let me take you back to where it all started, my childhood. I grew up in a home where everything was about my twin brother, Ethan. He was the golden child, destined for greatness, and my parents made sure I knew it. I was the one who could never measure up. Where Ethan excelled in school and was adored by everyone, I was the one who could never fit in. The more I tried to be myself, the more I was pushed aside. From a young age, My parents thought I was destined for failure, and they made sure I knew it. Ethan was always the star. His birthday parties were extravagant, with loads of friends and celebrations. Meanwhile, mine were often overlooked, with just a few gifts thrown my way. He had sleepovers all the time. I couldn't even bring a single friend over without feeling like I was disrupting the family. I could feel the sting of it every single day. And the worst part? It wasn't just me. It was my parents' outright favoritism toward him. I spent a lot of my childhood feeling invisible. The only person who really seemed to care for me was my grandmother. She always showed up with chocolates for me, slipping me a few extra dollars here and there. At least I knew I had someone who truly cared, even though it never felt enough to counter the overwhelming negativity of my home life. As the years went on, the situation didn't improve. If anything, it got worse. I'd go to my parents for support, but they mocked me instead. My grades were never good enough. My hobbies, sports, making friends, doing anything that wasn't academic, were laughed at. Nothing I did seemed to matter. They made it clear I was never going to live up to their expectations. I found solace in sports, but even that was taken away. They forbade me from participating in extracurriculars, telling me I needed to focus solely on my studies, just like Ethan. But he didn't face the same restrictions. It wasn't just frustrating, it was suffocating. Every time I tried to break free, I was pushed back down. Then came the incident that really set things in motion. I was grounded for having Snapchat on my phone. No, I wasn't out there doing anything bad. I was just a normal teenager. But to my parents, this was a betrayal of their trust. And so, they went ballistic. They tore apart my room, ripped the doors off their hinges, and told me I wasn't allowed any privacy anymore. Watching them rage at me, it was Ethan who made everything worse. Instead of supporting me, he took advantage of the chaos. He'd always been more of a quiet, introverted kid, but something inside him snapped. He started spreading lies, petty lies at first, but they grew darker. He accused me of things I never did, claiming I was the one stealing things, lying about him, bullying him. But my parents, always quick to believe the worst in me, accepted every word he said. It didn't matter that I was the one being punished for his actions. The most damaging lie he ever told, though, happened at school. When I was 14 during our birthday party, Ethan had no one show up. I don't know why his friends ghosted him that day, but it stung. Meanwhile, I had a blast with my friends. They took me out for ice cream and made me feel special. Ethan, on the other hand, fumed with jealousy. That's when the rumors started. He told everyone I was a spoiled brat, a bully at home. The worst part? He went so far as to hurt himself to fabricate proof. He'd punch himself to create bruises and black eyes, then show up at school claiming it was me. The story took hold, and before I knew it, my friends started looking at me differently. They stopped talking to me in the halls. Invitations to hang out started disappearing. It wasn't just the students who started turning their backs on me, it was the teachers, too. I remember the day the principal called me into his office. He sat there, stern and cold, with my parents at his side, and demanded I tell the truth. Ethan stuck to his story, each lie more believable than the last. I tried to explain, but my parents, they just wouldn't listen. My mother cried, begging for Ethan's protection. My father, furious with me, sided with him. It was like I was invisible in that room. The principal sided with Ethan, suspending me for bullying him. I couldn't believe it. The humiliation was unbearable. My parents dragged me home that day, still furious, and that's when the real nightmare started. My dad started packing my things. I begged him not to do this, not to throw me out of the house, but he didn't care. I wasn't the child he wanted me to be. I was a disappointment, a bully. I'll never forget the moment my grandmother came to pick me up. She came in, scooped up my things, and told my parents exactly what they deserved to hear. She wasn't afraid of them. She didn't cower. She took me away from that house, away from the abuse that had been my life for so long. It was the first time I felt truly safe. That day, my life changed. I went to live with my grandmother. For the first time, I felt like I had a chance at happiness, but the scars from those years never fully healed. It's funny how life works, though. I found a new kind of freedom when I went to college. I could finally breathe without the suffocating pressure of my parents' expectations. For the first time, I had control over my life. I could meet people, make friends without being judged for who I was, and I could focus on something I was truly passionate about writing. During college, I began freelancing as a content writer. It started small, just side jobs here and there, but it gave me the independence I had longed for. I didn't have to ask my parents for help, didn't have to live under their shadow, and I did well. In fact, I did better than I ever thought I could. Freelancing grew into a legitimate career. I was traveling the world, meeting clients, building a name for myself. I was finally financially independent, something I never imagined I'd have. But through all the success, I still had a part of me that longed for something validation, recognition. Not from strangers or clients, but from the people who had hurt me the most. My family, my parents, who had never believed in me, and my brother, the one who'd done everything to destroy me. It wasn't until I finished a massive project and got my first real TV appearance that things started to change. I posted about it on social media, proudly sharing my success. And that's when I heard from them, my parents. After years of silence, they reached out, not to apologize, but to ask for money. To say I was shocked would be an understatement. They had the audacity to congratulate me for my success and then demand that I help them with home renovations. Can you imagine? After all they'd put me through, now they were asking me for money. It was like a slap to the face. But I wasn't going to let them get away with it. They had treated me like garbage for years, and now they wanted something from me. I wasn't going to be their personal bank. Instead, I laid down a condition. If they wanted my help, they would have to publicly admit that my brother had ruined my life with his lies. They needed to acknowledge the pain they caused me publicly. Only then would I consider helping them. This was my moment, a chance to finally make them face the consequences of their actions. It was a tense few days after I laid out my demand. My parents were in complete shock when I told them they had to publicly admit what they'd done if they wanted anything from me. They tried to play it off at first, telling me it wasn't necessary, that we could just talk privately, but I wasn't going to let them off the hook so easily. No, if they really wanted to act like a family again, then they were going to have to own up to the damage they'd done. My dad was furious. He started questioning why I was even making this a condition, why I couldn't just help them out without all this drama. The thing is, they'd never once cared about what I went through. Not when I was growing up, not when I was kicked out. And now, after all the silence, they wanted to act like we were still a family? No, it wasn't going to happen that way. Not anymore. Mom, on the other hand, tried to guilt trip me. She was always good at that, wasn't she? Trying to make me feel like the bad guy for not just giving in. She started talking about how hard life had been for them recently, how they were struggling with renovations, how they had no money left. It was classic manipulation, but I wasn't falling for it. I just stared at her, cold and unmoved, while she went on and on about how much they needed my help. I couldn't believe the audacity. I reminded her that it wasn't me who had abandoned them. It wasn't me who had lied, who had let my brother's false accusations turn my life upside down. No, that was all on them. They didn't get to use me like this just because they had a problem. They needed to face the truth. And then my brother decided to step in. The nerve of him. After years of lying, years of ruining my reputation, he thought he could just waltz back into my life as if nothing had happened. He sent me a text, trying to make me feel guilty. He told me that he'd heard about the ultimatum I'd given our parents, and he made it clear that I should just let it go. He even went so far as to tell me that he'd lied about me all those years ago. But it was no big deal, and I should just move on. You know what? I almost laughed at the message. He had the gall to tell me to move on, to just forget everything. He wasn't the one who'd been falsely accused. He wasn't the one who'd been pushed out of our own home, thrown out like garbage by the people who were supposed to love and protect me. It was easy for him to say that. He hadn't suffered, not like I had, but as much as it hurt, I knew what I had to do. I wasn't going to let my brother or my parents continue to control the narrative of my life. I needed to take action, and this time, it wasn't about my anger or pain. It was about holding them accountable. I sat down that night and wrote an email to my family, to my parents, to my brother, and to any of the relatives who might still be in the dark about the truth. I laid everything out. Everything that had happened, every detail that they had conveniently forgotten over the years. I wrote about how my parents had treated me, how they'd always put Ethan on a pedestal while pushing me down. I told them about the rumors, the lies that had destroyed my reputation, and how I had been forced to leave the house with no place to go, only to find solace with my grandmother. I even attached screenshots of the message from my brother, the one where he admitted to lying about me. I wasn't just writing this for me. I was writing it for the people who had never seen the full picture, the ones who only heard one side of the story. I wanted them to know the truth. I wasn't going to let my brother's lies stand any longer. I hit send and just sat there for a while. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I knew this would change everything, that it would cause a storm. And sure enough, the response was swift. My phone was buzzing nonstop. My parents didn't take it well, of course. They were furious. My mom sent me a stream of angry texts, trying to guilt-trip me once again, saying that I was being unreasonable, that I shouldn't air our dirty laundry in front of the family. My dad, ever the authoritarian, threatened to cut me off completely, to make sure I'd never have a relationship with them again. But it wasn't me who had destroyed this family. It was them. And then there was Ethan. He went off too. I received another long, venomous message from him, trying to guilt me for not helping our parents. He even threw in some low blows, calling me selfish for not just forgetting everything that had happened in the past. He really thought that after all this time, I would just sweep it under the rug and let him get away with it? No, that wasn't happening. But something interesting happened after I sent that email. The rest of the family, the people who had stayed quiet all these years, started to come forward. Relatives I hadn't heard from in ages started reaching out to me, expressing their support. Some of them didn't even realize how bad things had been, how my brother's lies had torn me apart. They apologized, said they wished they'd known the truth sooner. It was the first time in my life that I felt like someone saw me for who I truly was, not the broken, discarded child my parents had painted me as, but someone who had survived, who had fought back. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a little lighter. My parents kept trying to contact me, but I ignored every call. After everything, I wasn't going to let them back in so easily. The lawyer I had consulted with sent them a cease and desist notice, just to make sure they knew the boundaries. And that was it. They stopped contacting me. Life went on. And slowly, I started to rebuild. I threw myself into my work, into my writing, into my career. My freelance business continued to grow, and the opportunities kept coming. Speaking at seminars, being featured on podcasts, even getting invited to share my story on a TV show, things were finally looking up. I was in control of my life now, but as successful as I became, there was always this nagging feeling in the back of my mind. What would they do when they realized they'd lost me for good? Would they ever regret the way they treated me? I didn't know, and honestly, I wasn't sure I cared anymore. I was free, truly free. But that didn't mean I was done with them. Not yet. It's been a few months since I sent that email, and a lot has changed. To say my family took it badly would be an understatement. My parents, as expected, kept their distance. They never stopped trying to reach me, but it's like I've become a ghost in their world. They don't know how to handle the truth I laid bare. They never imagined I'd expose everything like that. I can't say I'm sorry for it, though. They needed to see the consequences of their actions, and now they are. Ethan, on the other hand, couldn't let it go. That message he sent me, it wasn't the last of it. He started sending these nasty texts, calling me selfish for not helping them out financially, throwing in passive-aggressive remarks about how my life was perfect and how I was too stubborn to let go of the past. It was almost laughable. He was still trying to twist the situation, to make it about me being unreasonable, when all I ever did was defend myself. All I ever wanted was a fair shot, but he couldn't stand the fact that I wasn't playing his game anymore. I decided it was time to stop responding. Every time I read one of his messages, it felt like a punch in the gut. But I knew better than to engage with him. His words had no power over me anymore. Not after everything I'd been through. Not after the way he'd treated me. I wasn't about to give him the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. The most frustrating part, though, is the way my parents have completely disregarded everything. They've continued to try to play the victim. It's like they think I'll come running back. Like I'll forget everything once they apologize or pretend to care. But they haven't once taken real responsibility for their actions. Sure, they've sent me a few weak messages, but there's no genuine remorse, just guilt trips and excuses. I've stopped waiting for that apology that'll never come. They've shown me who they really are. Despite everything, I'm doing better than ever. I've grown so much since I walked away from that toxic environment. My career as a content writer has really taken off. I'm getting paid well. My clients are fantastic, and I've even had the chance to collaborate with some big brands. I'm living life on my terms now. traveling, working from wherever I want, and finally finding peace in the things that matter to me. I've also started focusing on myself, on healing. I decided to start therapy, something I should have done years ago. I'm not trying to fix what's broken with my family anymore. I'm trying to fix what was broken inside me. Therapy is helping me confront the years of emotional abuse, the years of living in their shadow, and finally letting go of the anger that's been building up for so long. It's not easy. Some days, I still feel that sting of betrayal, but I'm learning to let it go piece by piece. One of the best decisions I made after all of this was reconnecting with my grandmother. She's been my rock through all of this. She's the only one who's ever really been there for me. I visit her as often as I can, spending hours talking about life, about family, and just sharing quiet moments together. She's so proud of me, and honestly, that's all I need. Her love is real, and it's all the family I need. Recently, I took a little break from work to spend some quality time with her. She's really into gardening now, and she's taught me so much about plants, flowers, and herbs. I never thought I'd find myself learning about gardening, but spending those afternoons with her working in the garden, talking about the little things, has been some of the most peaceful and fulfilling time I've had in years. It's simple, but it's exactly what I needed. Things have been quiet on the family front since I sent that email. My parents haven't tried reaching out again, and I'm not sure if it's because they've finally gotten the message or if they just don't care anymore. Either way, I'm not bothered by it. I'm done letting them control my emotions. It's exhausting, and I have better things to do now. I'm also learning to accept that not everything needs to be tied up with a neat bow. I've let go of the idea that my family needs to be the way it was. I've stopped waiting for them to change, for them to suddenly realize how much they hurt me. The truth is, they may never change, but I have. I'm not that broken kid anymore. I'm strong, independent, and I'm living for myself now. And I'll be honest, I do feel a sense of satisfaction knowing that they know I'm doing better. They were so sure I'd fail. They thought I'd crumble, that I wouldn't amount to anything. But here I am, successful, content, and finally at peace. The universe has a funny way of making things work out. Maybe not in the way you expect, but it works. I've come to realize that sometimes the best revenge isn't the kind you plan or plot out. It's just living well, moving forward, doing better, and proving to everyone, including yourself, that you're more than what they ever believed you could be. So, yeah, I think this is the final chapter of that story. I'm moving on, and I'm better off without them. The pain is still there, but it doesn't control me anymore. I'm focused on the future now, and nothing, not even them, can take that from me.